Good morning. My name is Marcus Blum, and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Nevada, Reno. Today we're going to be discussing one of my chapters from a dissertation. And before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Dr. Jonathan Greenberg, Dr. Kelly Stewart, Mike Cox, and Dr. Vern Blank. As we're all familiar with, wildlife select habitats based on four key components: water, food, space, and cover. Each of these components are essential to an individual's ability to reproduce, survive, and therefore enhance that individual's reproductive fitness. Selection of cover types varies seasonally and with changing life history stages. For instance, individuals may select shaded areas, a thermal cover, during summer months to minimize heat loss. Throughout the year and following parturition events, we may expect individuals to select security cover, or areas that help animals hide from predators. And finally, animals may select areas that allow easier escape routes, which decrease the risk of predation. So let's talk a little bit more about security and escape cover. We expect that these cover types are especially important during the lambing season for bighorn sheep. As many of us are familiar with, these lambing areas are typically described by precipitous terrain, where females and juveniles can better evade predators. In these areas, females may be trading off high-quality nutrition to select these brutal landscapes so that they may increase the likelihood of survival for their offspring and therefore increasing their own reproductive fitness. Furthermore, during these lambing seasons, we expect females to select areas based on visibility and concealment characteristics. These landscapes offer a wide array of features that may aid in visibility or concealment, including vegetation, rock outcroppings, and other uneven terrain features. Females may select areas that increase their visibility and allow for increased detection of predators, or they may select areas that provide greater concealment covers so that their offspring can avoid detection if left behind. Then again, it's certainly possible that these mothers are selecting areas that offer both visibility and concealment to maximize their offspring's chances of survival. We can measure visibility and concealment in a variety of ways. More traditional methods include cover boards or well poles. Those in forestry typically use densiometers to measure canopy covers, but they can be equally useful in bighorn sheep studies, as overhead cover may limit aerial predation from eagles. More recent methods include LiDAR, which generates super high resolution point clouds and basically recreates the landscape. Another method that is less common is structure from motion. Structure from motion is the process of estimating a 3D structure from a landscape using 2D images. So basically taking pictures and recreating the landscape just based off those pictures. Creates similar point clouds to what we see in LiDAR. Today we're going to focus on the potential for structure from motion to map bighorn habitat. So the study area we're going to focus on today is Lone Mountain. Lone Mountain is located in west central Nevada. It's about 20 kilometers away from Tonopah, Nevada. The area is known for its highly precipitous terrain, and I'm going to show you a video here just to give you an idea of what the mountain actually looks like from within. So this is actually right in the middle of some of our prime lambing habitat. Ton of escape terrain, really messy, lots of cliffs, fun stuff. Great for catching babies in there. So beginning in January 2016 through January 2018, we captured a total of 32 adult females on Lone Mountain. Each individual was given a Vectronic Iridium GPS collar, where we collected 6 locations per day. We also collected body condition, pregnancy status, and morphometric measurements for each individual captured. Every individual that was identified as pregnant received a vaginal implant transmitter, which had a UHF or ultra high frequency connection with the adult collar, so that we can identify parturition events from afar and not necessarily have to be on site. So we monitored VITs throughout this following captures. Once vits were expelled, we'd go in and try and capture the lambs. Upon capture of the lambs, we would take weight, give them an expandable VHF collar, take morphometric measurements, as well as mark down the birth site location, which we would find usually close to the vit or at the vit, and we'd identify based on presence of placenta, blood, disturbance, smell, variety of factors. And then also the hide site location of where the lamb was caught. Following the capture seasons, we went ahead and plotted all the birth sites and hide sites in ArcGIS. We then created random sites, a 1-to-1 ratio, and we created these sites within 150 meters of associated birth sites and hide sites based on the methods used by Smith et al. 2015. We then buffered each one of these locations, that includes the used locations and the available locations, by 50 meters. We drew polygons around the clusters of the buffer points. Just so this gave us, basically we didn't have to fly as much or fly every single plot. We would just fly really large polygons instead of each individual plot. Then we set up flight transects, and we used a DJI Mavic Pro, which you can get at Best Buy for about $1,000 now, and the Maps Made Easy software. So basically this drone is going to automatically fly these transects up and down the polygon, and we set it to get a 90% picture overlap and at a 60-meter flight height. So basically you set this all up in the software, and then you release the drone to go do all your work. And it consists of a lot of sitting around and waiting, and then the drone flies back whenever its battery is running low. Change out the battery, it resumes where it left off. So once we conducted all the flights or all the birth sites and hide sites, or as many as we could get, we then brought all the images into a software or program called Pix4D. So what Pix4D does is it brings in all of the photos that you take on these transects, and it processes them, and it looks for tie points within these individual photos. So if you look at the image here on the right, we can see that these are all different pictures, but it's the same spot. And this software identifies this, and it uses this to stitch together all the photos. Then what it's going to do is it's going to use those stitched photos, measure the distances from the ground, or from the drone to the ground, or not even just the ground, but also the vegetation, obviously, since it's creating a point cloud. And then it's creating those point clouds. And then we get these awesome maps. This is one example of one of our areas that we mapped on Lone Mountain. And here's another one. As you can see, again, we did these large areas, but this Pix4D program, as well as the DJI software, does an excellent job of mapping the terrain features. There are always some little errors, as you can see around the edges. It's going to be a little bit more, just because you don't have as many pictures there, and certainly not as much overlap. You're going to have holes in your imagery. That's common. And then, as we found out, and was sort of to be expected, when you're flying in really nasty cliffs, you're not going to always get that 90% overlap, and that's going to result in some of the holes that we see here within the like the main study area or the main polygon. To give you a little bit better idea of what this imagery actually looks like, how high quality it is, next couple slides I'm going to show you just what we're dealing with here. So as you can see, super high resolutions, capturing the vegetation. It's doing a phenomenal job of catching the vegetation, every little nook and cranny on the landscape. Again, there you see some of those holes that I talked about in the landscape, and that's just really steep terrain, cliffs. You can fill those in within this program. But so it's not without its flaws, but overall, I think it does a really, really good job of mapping out the environment. So if we were to zoom into one of those point clouds, and if this is actually a burst site right here. What we can do now is, so we have this burst site and we can measure visibility and concealment based on all these landscape features, the vegetation, whatnot. We can essentially send out thousands of points in every possible direction and measure perfect visibility and concealment, or close to perfect. I guess nothing is ever perfect. Again, just to give you an idea of how high quality this imagery actually is, you can just see the detail here on the landscape. And as someone who has spent thousands and thousands of hours on this mountain, I can say it looks pretty good. So how do we go about using this image? So once we have all of our fancy new data, we can begin to analyze it. We may start by generating DTMs, which is a digital terrain model, which are essentially elevation models. DTMs and DEMs are typically interchangeable, although that's not always the case. In our case, how we're using them, it certainly is. We can then use these layers to get more accurate measurements of elevation, slope, and terrain ruggedness. We'd use the DTM for that. It also creates a DSM, which is a digital surface model, and that's going to include your vegetation on top of the ground layer. So imagine a DEM with vegetation incorporated into it, and that would be your DSM. Furthermore, we can bring the point clouds into a variety of programs and conduct viewshed analyses on them. This allows us to measure a high-resolution viewshed of an animal from a specific location, like a birth site or a hide site. We can also measure cover types and identify vegetation types through these point clouds. We could also, if you alter the drones in the right way, you could also calculate NDVI. There's a lot of use with this information, but for us, we're primarily bringing it into ArcGIS and R and trying to identify the true view sheds of these of the female at birth sites as well as the lamb at the birth sites. So with new technology or new methods, there's always going to be some constraints and some bumps along the way. One thing that we really run into, or that's really come to my attention, this is huge data sets. We're talking tens of millions of points. And part of that's because I've decided to map huge areas rather than just individual plots. So because there's so many points in the point clouds, and we're talking 2-3 centimeter resolution here, you need a lot of processing power. And you can use the cloud for that, or if you have access to a supercomputer, that's always nice as well. So we would some of my larger plots would take 4 days with, I don't know, 48 processors going. It takes a lot of time. Just a regular computer will take days for some of my smaller plots. So it's very time consuming, huge data storage. These are all things you have to consider. There's at least 2 terabytes of data just on my data set alone, just for load mountain. With that, I would like to acknowledge all of our funding sources. And if we have time, I know we have time for questions because I can see. Thank you, and look forward to hearing from y'all in person.